did such a great job. Love worship, love that song. Um, I am abandoned, my heart surrendered to you. Now, if you are a nerd like me, you can take out your note page. And there's a big old picture of my face on there. So if you want to take notes, and all the other speakers as well, because I love to take notes. Also, you can take out your phone and check in at Forest Park Church, and you can do a selfie with your friends and say Adore 2021 so that everybody sees where you are. Because this is going to be the place to be for the next 36, 48 hours. You know, if you had asked me last October, so October of 2020, if we would be here tonight, I don't know that I would have said that we would be here. It feels so good to be in this room. I love the way that our team has created this amazing environment. Is this not amazing? All of this cool stuff. You know, I wanted to do 80s because of the fact, only because it's so colorful. You know, really, and they just went with it. And I just thought it would be such a great introduction to come back to do something well. Because we're all looking for normalcy. We're all craving normalcy. And to do something that feels as if it is life prior to COVID. You know, we've all lost so much as a result of this global pandemic. And so that's where this theme came from, I am here. Because I started thinking that people have lost so much, but if you're in this room tonight, physically you're here, but also there's a part of you that might not be here mentally or emotionally because so many things have happened to you. But what I want you to try to do is zero in and really focus for the next little bit of time and just really put yourself at the top of the list and say, this weekend is something that I need, and really open your mind and heart to that. So I want to tell you about a word that you might not have heard before, or maybe you just haven't used it or defined it. It's the word resilience. The word resilience. I love the word resilience. And so that is the word that we're going to talk about for the next little bit. And so resilience, okay, so I've got some other slides going on here. There's Marianne. Okay, there's me. There we go. Resilience, it's the ability to recover and adapt after something hard happens. So resilience, it's that things happen in your life that you're not prepared for. And there's a group of people that have the ability to bounce back and recover. And then there's another group of people that have the ability to bounce back, recover, and then adapt to their new life. And that is what I want to talk about tonight, is resilience and what that means for us and your ability to not only just keep surviving, but to adapt to a new normal, because that's what we all have had to do. Now, this author, her name is Lolly Daskell, and in this book, she says how to be more resilient when things get tough, is that resilience is not a trait that people are born with. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. You know, a lot of times we look at strong people and we think, wow, they're so strong. They must have been born strong. We think they've just got an extra bone that is the strong bone. And we think that they just seem, stuff comes at them and they just swipe it off this way and swipe it off that way. And they just seem to have resilience that maybe you might not feel like you have. Well, this author says that we have the ability to develop it, to grow it, by our behavior, by our actions, by our practices. And I would go on to say that resilience can only be formed in the most deep, dark moments of the soul. And that's where we learn the growth, and that's where we learn the tenacity, and that's where we learn the courage. Now, in a room this size, we had 140 people register or something like that, that there are so many of us in that type group setting that have experienced deep, dark sadness. And so tonight I want you to know that you are not alone and you are with family. I grew up going to church. My mom and dad, we were one of those families that every time the door was open, we were there. Anybody else have a family like that? Okay. And so every time the door's open, we were there. My mom and dad weren't pastors, but I always say that my dad was a pastor's friend. My dad was the biggest support for a pastor, and we grew up in that environment. And so I was always in Sunday school, always in kids' church. And I remember from very early that one of the stories that I loved was the story of Joseph. And Joseph was a character in the Bible that experienced a lot of disappointment and a lot of hurt, but he was also one of the most resilient men. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about his story tonight. Now, I always say that one of the foundations of being able to feel connected to a group of people, in a relationship with friends, even in your work, is that you have the ability to be heard and to be seen and to be known. We all crave those things intrinsically. And when I say be known and when I say be seen, is that in a room like this, it feels so good when you know somebody is saving a seat for you, that somebody is looking out for you, that there's a crowd, but you know somebody's got your name. Somebody is searching for you, and they are waiting for you. A lot of times that when we go through pain and we go through darkness, and we go through sorrow, we always have opinions about how people should go through pain. Because, we might have suffered some, and so you develop your own opinions and your own thoughts and philosophies. Rarely ever does anybody need your thoughts and your opinions and your philosophies. What they need is for you to do one thing: witness their pain. Sit with them. Hold their hand. Don't try and fix it. They don't need you to fix it. They need you to hold it. They need you to hold it with them. And so I was able to share in a message a couple of weeks ago here at Forest Park that we were talking about auto responses to pain. And I was talking about fear, anxiety, and those kinds of things. And something that I said that really resonated with people is that we say your story matters, you matter, your story matters, it's important. But what I have found personally is that my story matters until my story makes you feel very uncomfortable. And when my story makes you feel uncomfortable, it's a little bit more difficult to hold my hand and hold my heart because pain feels kind of yuck. And so Joseph experienced a lot of pain in his life, but I think you're going to be able to see stories that he experienced and character traits that he developed that you're going to be able to apply to your own life. And again, just to reiterate that, is that when we hurt, the single most important thing we need is for someone just to sit with us and witness our story. And if you've had somebody sit with you and witness your story and hold your hand and hold your heart, there is nothing better than that. That you don't feel like somebody's trying to fix you and take away your pain. You just feel like they're being patient until you walk through it. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, Joseph, a lot of things about Joseph. Joseph, his story is in the book of Genesis. Okay? It encapsulates about 14, 15 chapters, and I am not going to read all that to you. All right, but I just want you to know that that's where it is. The first book of the Bible is Genesis. And if you want to go home and read about Joseph, he was a cool guy and had a lot of stuff going on. But let me tell you a little bit about Joseph. He was in this family with a lot of brothers, and Joseph had a lot of talent. Joseph was gifted. Joseph was smart. Joseph was intuitive. And Joseph was the apple of his dad's eye. He was the favorite. And if you've ever grown up in a big family, there's normally a favorite. We hate to say that, but there typically is. If you're the favorite, raise your hand and be free. Raise your hand and be free. Yes, yes. It is what it is. And so Joseph was the favorite, of his dad, no doubt. And Joseph was really gifted, and Joseph had this thing that God had given him the ability to do, was that if somebody had a dream, they'd come to Joseph and say, hey, this is what my dream is, what's it mean? Well, Joseph said that there was this dream that he had, and all of his brothers were bowing before him. Now, that didn't go over real well with the brothers. Okay? And then a couple of days later, he said, I have this dream, and now the whole family is bowing. And so that even went over worse. So his brothers decide to hatch a plan that they are going to kill him. He is the favorite. His dad loves him, but they are so seething with jealousy over his skill set, over his confidence. Now, if I think back through it, it probably wasn't a wise idea for Joseph to go telling his brothers that they're all going to be bowing to him. They didn't. He should have known his brothers better than that. But they ended up, instead of killing him, they sold him into slavery. And so then Joseph ended up in a guy's house whose name was Potiphar. Okay, Potiphar was a leader in Egypt. And, for the most part, Potiphar was a good guy, but he had some struggles too. Look at this scripture. So Genesis chapter 39, verses 3 and 4. Now, I am reading, what I put here is from the Message paraphrase, and I love that because it's easy to understand. We have a lot of people here, and, sometimes Bibleese is a little bit hard to understand. So I love this. His master recognized that God was with him. So we're talking about Potiphar. Potiphar recognized that God was with Joseph, saw that God was working for good in everything that he did, and he became very fond of Joseph and made him his personal aide. He put him in charge of all of his personal affairs, turning everything over to him. So Joseph had been sold by his brothers. He thought, I'm sure he felt as if they were going to kill him because they dropped him in a big pit. And they left him to die. And then they sold him to Potiphar, and he became in slavery. So what this verse says to me that's so clear is that he took a situation that was horrific, but he stayed faithful. He stayed true to his talent. He stayed true to his purpose. And Potiphar was able to recognize that good things happened for Joseph, and he was fond of him. Now, do we think that means that Joseph was not bitter or angry that his brothers had abandoned him and left him? Of course he was. He had been abandoned and forgotten and left to die. They sold him into slavery. They didn't care what happened to him. But Joseph stayed faithful, and Potiphar thought he was such a good guy that he put him in charge of his personal effects. But then some bad stuff started happening, poor Joseph. Potiphar had a wife who had the hots for him, the big hots for him. Okay, and she did put her eyes on Joseph, and she decided, I want you. That is a bad place for Joseph to be in. He looked at her and he said, I'm not doing this. This is not who I am. This is not my character. And your husband has put me in charge of his house, his affairs, all the things. I honor and respect him. Then she falsely accuses him of sexual assault. So here he is trying to be faithful. He's trying to do what God has called him to do. And then this woman comes at him, and then he keeps himself as much as he could, making good choices, good decisions. I'm sure he didn't end up in a room by himself with her. Somebody else was listening, doing all of the things he could do, and she still accuses him of sexual assault. And then we find out that Joseph ends up in prison. Because who did Potiphar believe? His wife. He believed that Joseph had done exactly what she had said. Potiphar was not happy about throwing Joseph in prison because he recognized the gifts that were in Joseph's life. There are people that can recognize how powerful you are, but when it comes down to it, a lot of times they're going to make the choices to protect themselves and not you. They're going to protect their family and their story, and it might leave you abandoned, and it might even leave you in prison. And that's what happened to Joseph. So now we find out he's in prison, and how was his attitude? How was his response? Look at this verse. But there in jail, God was still with Joseph. He reached out in kindness to him and put him on good terms with the head jailer. The head jailer put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. He ended up managing the whole operation. Have you ever seen that anytime there's these people that they just walk into a room and they just take charge? I kind of think that's the way Joseph was. No matter where he was, he kept his attitude right, he kept his mind right, and he was able to make good choices. He ended up managing everything. The head jailer gave Joseph free rein, never even checked on him because God was with him. Whatever he did, God made sure that it worked out best for Joseph. And you might think that that's a real oxymoron. I mean, because things obviously were not working out well for Joseph. Okay, his brothers had abandoned him. His brothers had plotted his murder, had plotted his death. Somebody had some compassion and decided we'll just sell him into slavery. And then Potiphar gets hold of him and, really esteems him because he's a good guy. Joseph is a good man. Potiphar's wife accuses him of sexual assault. He finds himself in prison. But we see yet again that even in the midst of all of that pain and disappointment, Joseph is faithful, and the head jailer puts him in charge of the whole thing. Now, what happened to him in prison was then he started the whole dream stuff again because he was really gifted. And so the Bible tells us that there were a couple of guys that were thrown in jail beside him, and there was a cupbearer. Okay, that means somebody that literally carried a cup to the king and said, "Here, king, you can have something to drink." So they were close to the king, the cupbearer, and then a baker. So these guys were obviously part of the food service industry, of the kings, and they're all in jail together, and they start sharing about different dreams that they've had, and Joseph starts interpreting these dreams because that is his gift, his talent. He never abandoned that. He stayed true to who he was. How many of you that in times that things just start falling apart, you get really tempted to just abandon everything? You get really tempted to say, it's just not worth the fight. I had these dreams. I wanted this kind of marriage. I wanted this kind of job. I wanted this kind of relationship with my kids. I wanted this kind of relationship with my work. And I was falsely accused of things that I did not do. I lost my job. I could not figure out how to get my kids to meet me where I was. I lost my kids. My marriage fell apart. And at that moment, it is really hard to stand in the face of all of that and keep moving forward. But Joseph did it, and he stayed true to that. So the cupbearer guy says, "This is my dream." Joseph says, "This is what it means." The baker guy says, "This is my dream. This is what it means." Well, then they end up getting out of jail because they ain't been accused of sexual assault. And so they say to him, "I will tell the king how great you are. And surely somebody's going to come get you out of here." But that is not what happened. That is not what happened. They forgot him and left him there. Then one day, the king is in such anguish because he's had this dream. And then the cupbearer says, "Hey, I remember this guy in prison. He can interpret dreams." So he comes before the king, before Pharaoh, and he says, "This is what your dream means. It all worked out good." Then the king puts him in charge of everything. So he's out of jail, and then Joseph becomes a leader. Now, I'm laying all this foundation because I think it's important for you to understand about Joseph's life, that he was a slave, that he was a prisoner, and those two things then led him to be one of the greatest leaders in the Bible. Look at this verse. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "You are the man for us. God has given you the inside story. No one is as qualified as you in experience and wisdom. From now on, you're in charge of my affairs. All my people will report to you. Only as king will I be over you." So Pharaoh commissioned Joseph and said this, "I'm putting you in charge of the entire country of Egypt." Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his finger. He slipped it on Joseph's hand. That is a big deal, people. He took off his ring and he gave it to Joseph. Remember, Joseph was a slave. Joseph was a prisoner. And now, in essence, Joseph is being commissioned as king. He outfitted him in robes and the best linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He put him in second command, chariot at his disposal, all that great stuff. People rode by, said, "Bravo." Joseph was in charge of the entire country of Egypt. So he had been greatly esteemed. And the king was honoring the gifts and the talents that he had stayed true to. But I want to remind you about some things about Joseph. Joseph was betrayed and left to die. Joseph was accused and left to die. Joseph was forgotten and left to die. I know there are those of you that feel forgotten tonight, and you feel you've been left to die. You've been accused falsely, and you feel like you've been left to die. But God is not finished with you. He is just getting started. And that is what was happening in the life of Joseph. He had been left and abandoned and betrayed by the people who could hurt him most, his family, his brothers. But he stayed true to what it was that God had called him to do. Now, Joseph gave his life. He spent his life to the service of other people. When Joseph was working for Pharaoh and, as second in command, a couple of things were happening. The country was experiencing horrible famine. And so people were hungry. They were starving. And so the king put Joseph in charge of making some decisions to help, make so that people could get food. So he was really smart, and he was able to make choices so that everybody would get a little bit of food. And so it was wonderful because of the fact that he was able to use his talents and his gifts. Now, remember his family? They're still there. Those brothers are still there. They're still wreaking havoc. They still haven't told their dad the truth. The dad has spent his entire life thinking that his son, his favorite, was dead. Can you imagine the just hardness of those brothers? That they would allow their dad to believe a complete and total lie. The pain that he was having to experience on a daily basis, and they were watching it. Really hard truth about leadership and about being an adult is that there are people that are laying in wait for you to fail. It is very difficult to wrap your mind around that. And it isn't because they're intrinsically bad. They are insecure in who they are. And so the compassion that Joseph had for his brothers was incredible. And so it ends up happening that these guys come and they stand before him because they needed to beg for food. So some of the brothers come, they have to go. And Joseph immediately recognizes his brothers, but they do not recognize him. They do not understand that the king that they are standing before was the little boy that they left to die and sold into slavery. But he immediately recognizes them. His heart is broken. He stays true to who he is. He did not take vengeance out on them and throw them in jail, which he had all the power to do. They could have served the rest of their lives for attempted murder, because that's exactly what happened. But he did not do that. He met their needs where they were, and he gave them the food. But this is the thing, that when you remain true to yourself and you remain true to those values that you have in the face of people rejecting you, in the face of a lot of difficult moments, it is not going to leave you without a limp. It's not going to leave you without a real cost to that. And so look at this verse here. Genesis chapter 42, verses 22 through 23. Reuben broke in. Now, Reuben is the oldest brother. Reuben says, didn't I tell you, he's talking to his brothers, didn't I tell you don't hurt the boy? But no, you wouldn't listen. And now we are paying for his murder. Joseph had been using an interpreter, so they didn't know that Joseph was understanding every word. So these brothers are having this conversation. We are starving because we tried to kill our brother. And so we are experiencing this, and they are speaking in a different language. And so Joseph was using an interpreter, and so they did not realize that he was understanding everything that they said. And the Bible tells us that Joseph turned away from them and cried, because he was hearing these brothers that he loved that planned his murder, and they're standing in front of him, and they are in such need. But he did not want to take out his anger. Do anger. How many times has somebody done something to you and you know that you could take out some vengeance on them, but you have chosen to look the other way? Maintain your integrity so that you can be true to who you are. But it's going to cost you something. There's going to be a lot of tears. There's going to be a lot of pain. And that's exactly what Joseph was experiencing. You know, 2 years ago, when, it feels like it's been a lot longer than that. Okay, 2020, so we're now 2021. I started planning for Adore in 2019 for Adore 2020. And I just really was in a place that I felt like I was just kind of floating in this world. And I didn't really, kind of know what was going on. I experienced some disappointment, and I experienced some loneliness, and I had experienced where I felt like I was that person that was just kind of being tossed here and tossed there, and it was just really difficult. And then we started the pandemic. Nobody prepared us for a global pandemic. Nobody. And during that pandemic, we have lost so much, as I alluded to earlier. Some of you have lost your jobs. You've lost relationships. You have lost, and some of you have lost people that you love. You have said goodbye to in hospitals, over FaceTime, over just all of these horrible things that have happened. Those of you that are in healthcare, you have worked hours upon hours, and nobody knows what you have sacrificed to take care of so many people who have been sick. And so I was, just kind of swimming around in the middle of that last March, March 15th, when we decided we were going to go online, and everybody learned how to do virtual church. And nobody wanted to do virtual church, but we all decided that we had to learn how to do it and start pastoring people from afar. Well, the very essence of pastoring is connection. It's a physical connection. It's people in the room so that we can get to know each other, and we can do that whole process of carrying one another's pain. And in a moment, that was stripped away. I did not do well with that. I did not do well with that at all. I mean, I did bad, really bad. And so then I decided that I can't see my people, so I'm going to start an online group, a virtual group. And we called that group, not very creatively, Connect, because I am definitely not creative. And so Connect. And so every day for 4 months at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, ta-da, there I was on the phone. And I would have to get up and prepare for that. And so it gave me, a lot of you guys were a part of it. I mean, before I knew it, we had like 100 people in that group. And every day we were talking about, now we'd become educators. Now we had become stay-at-home workers. And because of the fact that I had worked from my home, people were using me as a resource for all of this. And I was able to really provide it felt like a place there until I turned off that phone. And then all of that deep pain just settled back on me again. And it was so new to me, the concept of panic attacks. And if you've ever had a panic attack or anxiety attack, you feel as if you are exploding from the inside out. And I had my first panic attack when Ashlyn was having a baby and I was sitting in the parking lot. Little did I know that Ashlyn was experiencing such deep pain, and not just, having the baby, but she almost lost her life. But I sensed it and I felt it, had a panic attack out there in the car by myself. I was like, where is the ambulance in the hospital? Because I think I need one. I remember going inside saying, I think I'm having a heart attack. And they're like, no, you're just having a panic attack. I'm like, okay, whatever. And so we just kept going through that. And every day I felt as if it was getting deeper and darker. And this hole was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is what I want to share with you that I learned leading that group, which was lifeblood to a lot of you that are here. But it was, for me, I could not outrun it. I was trying as hard as I could to outrun that pain. I was trying so hard by getting up and preparing for our group and getting ready and having something going on, because that's the kind of person I am. I need to prepare. I need to do. I need to just have stuff happening because inherently I am a pastor. And my pastor people were gone. But I could not outrun it. And so it began to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so this is what I learned in the middle of that I had to feel it. We talked about in that group a lot of times that feelings are for feeling. We need to feel them. We need to lean into them. We have to deal with them. The only way to get from here to there is to lean into it. And then at that moment is where we're going to be able to have some sense of healing. I have heard a lot of people say that, I've heard this phrase a lot, that that what I don't deal with will eventually deal with me. And that's what ended up happening with me. And so I began to experience such deep depression and darkness that I knew that I needed to see somebody professionally when I didn't want to be on the earth anymore. That I would wake up and think, you know what, it just isn't worth it. And then in the next moment, I'm like, what is wrong with you? You've got so many great things. But I'm going to tell you, if you've experienced that, there are no amount of words that you can use to talk yourself out of that. And I talked with my doctor about it, and she referred me to a psychotherapist. Those people are really important. And so I went to go see the psychotherapist with my arms crossed. I'm like, okay, what you got? And that's basically the way it was. And, it ended up that there's this whole concept called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is something that you cannot, you know about it, you think about it with soldiers, and we hear about it, but there's its cousin called complex. And complex PTSD happens when you cannot escape your pain. It typically happens in childhood trauma of children who have been very physically abused, sexually abused, and they have to keep reliving it because they can't escape it. Well, I couldn't escape church. Church was the place that I realized was causing me the most pain. So fast forward to October 2020, we've been closed for 7 months. Every other church had been closed for 7 months for the most part. And the statistics were very clear. 33% of people had either stopped going to church altogether or they were going to a new church. For someone like me, my brain, I'm Enneagram 1. If you know anything about the Enneagram, I need for 1 + 1 to equal 2. I need to understand why things happen the way that they do. And if I can't understand it, then it's hard for me to accept it. Well, I couldn't understand why people wouldn't come back to church. In my mind, I'm like, We've given 20 years of our lives to this. What is wrong with these people? Don't they realize that we've been gone for 7 months? Now we're open. It's time to come back. Here we go. Where are ya? Where are you people? And so I would come in the back door and I'd be bouncing in like, I typically would be. I'd come up and sit up here, where Scott and Anthony are sitting. I'd have worship. Everything would be great. And I would find myself backing up to the green room, and then I'd find my way. There's a corridor back here, and I'd be out that back door in the car. And so I was avoiding anything that would cause me pain. My kids were like, what is wrong with her? That we had always gone out to lunch and everything, but it was causing me so much anxiety, and I was experiencing that trauma. Now, it was so hard for me because I love this place. I love this room. I always say that this room is where I've met some of my most amazing friends in this room. This room is where I've seen lives change. But this room has also been the source of a lot of pain. This room has also been the source of a lot of disappointment. And so my mind just had a real difficult time with trying to accept it all. And so I ended up leaving that therapist because she told me that these relationships in my life, that some of these, she didn't have any concept of God. And I'm really academic by nature. And so I wanted somebody that just understood psychotherapy. And she told me I needed to start cutting off all these relationships. I'm like, you don't understand that we pastor these people. I'm not cutting them off. And so then I decided I wanted to see somebody who understood pastoring. And so I've been in therapy now for about 6 months. And one of the things that I've realized, for the longest time, I didn't even call her. Her name's Julie. I wouldn't even call her name. I just called her the therapist. Like, I wouldn't even refer to her by name. I hated it. Oh, it's a love-hate relationship. I hated going to see that woman. And I still do. I still do. Every single time I try to figure out how not to go. Every single time. And Scott will encourage, he's like, you really need to go see her. Go see her. And because he knows it's been good for me. But this is one of the things that she said, is that you are really great. And I know that I'm not the only one that's really great at this. You are really great at categorizing your emotions. And so you take out whatever you're feeling, anger, shame, disappointment, and you put it in this beautiful gift basket. And you just deposit it. And then you put it back on the shelf. And then your disappointment, you just deposit it, and then you put it back on the shelf. Then your anger, and you deposit it, and you put it back on the shelf. Your loneliness, you put it back on the shelf. And what started happening to me is that shelf started collapsing under the weight of all of that pain. And I was left with panic and anxiety. And I began to embrace avoidance as a normal way of life. It began to be what was my new normal, because I didn't want to be in any place that would remind me of what I've been through. So I want you just to think about that right now in your life. Is there a place that you are avoiding? Are there people that you're avoiding? Are there relationships that you're avoiding? And you don't even really realize it, because I'm going to tell you, I had no concept of this until she pointed it out, the therapist. Until she pointed it out. And she said, you have experienced a significant trauma every year for 5 years. 5 years. And you just keep functioning, and you keep moving, and you just keep, and eventually what you do not deal with is going to deal with you. And that is going to happen to all of us, because we were not created to carry pain alone. And we are not created to keep it inside and keep it bottled up. Now, I'm not giving you permission to go explode on your family and your friends, because that lends to its own sense of problems. But you do not have to keep all of that bottled up inside. This is something about anxiety that I think is just amazing. Is that anxiety absolutely demands your attention. If you ignore it, it's going to justify its existence by making up stories. one of the things that I realized is that I inherently have always been really fearless. I'm not scared of a whole lot of stuff. I love mission trips. I love doing global outreach. I've been to Africa twice right by myself. 28 hours on an airplane. I would say goodbye to my husband, blow him a kiss, say I'll see you in 3 weeks. And I would message him, whatever. But it was not, I just loved experiencing things. Then I started having these thoughts. I was keeping Ashlyn's little boy one time, and they overnight. And I remember having the thought, what if somebody breaks in this house? What am I going to do? And I was like, I have never had that thought before. But that's what anxiety does. If you ignore it, it's going to make up the very worst case scenario. It will not be ignored. And so those are some of those things that I started realizing with anxiety. Now, a story, and I'm thankful for the therapist. I'm thankful for Julie. I'm thankful for her in my life. I will say that I am definitely not healed, but I am in the process of healing. I am in the process of accepting and trying my best to open up those boxes and not let them sit on that shelf for very long. But I will unequivocally say that what you do not deal with is going to deal with you. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Tokyo Olympics that happened this summer, 2020. And one of the stories that just absolutely took over the news cycle was Simone Biles. And if you were watching her and you realize that, there is no doubt Simone Biles is the greatest gymnast that has ever lived. What does they call it? The GOAT. Greatest of all time, the GOAT. I'm not good at jokes and all of that stuff, but I saw a little goat on her little leotard thing, so I know that's what that means. And so she was just phenomenal. And so we watch her at the Olympics. And during the team competition, she withdraws. She realizes that she cannot continue because something is happening inside of her. Now, what she called it was, that she was struggling mentally, that her head was not in the game. But this is what she was going through. I should have quit way before Tokyo. When Larry Nassar was in the media for 2 years, it was too much. But I was not going to let him take something I've worked for since I was 6 years old. I wasn't going to let him take that joy away from me. So I pushed past for as long as my mind and my body would let me. So she prepared to go to, and those of you who might not be aware, Larry Nassar was a physician that was their Olympic trainer and has been convicted of sexually abusing more than 150 gymnasts, girls and boys. And he was in the most trusted relationship with those kids and their parents. And he abused those girls and those guys. And what she was doing was trying to push forward rather than dealing with what was happening inside of her. When she got to the Tokyo Olympics, when she was away from her family and away from her friends and away from her support system, what was inside of her demanded to be dealt with. And thankfully, she realized that obviously when you're flipping 5 or 6 times, and could break your neck very easily, that became what was most important. Now, getting back to Joseph and, why we call this conference I Am Here, is that what I want to share with you in these next 2 days is that, and then with all of, the speakers that are here and, with Nedra talking tomorrow about boundaries, is that there are practices that you can put in your life. There are people that you can surround yourself with that will lead you to a place of peace and a place of freedom. Is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. If you are like me and you had suppressed and ignored, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of swim out of all of that mush. But it is absolutely possible. Scott he has a podcast, to make sure, you listen to his podcast. It's really great. And he interviewed me when he relaunched his podcast last month. And one of the questions, and I didn't want him to tell me the questions ahead of time because I felt like it would just be more natural if we talked openly. And one of the questions that he asked me during his podcast was that, what is the most important thing you learned as far as in the pain of the pandemic? And I sat there and I thought for just a moment, and I said, I think what I realized and what I'm really sad about is that it took a pandemic for me to recognize the people that were really in my corner. It took the pandemic and being separated from people who have carried my pain and held my heart and witnessed my pain to really realize that they were there. And something that I shared with him is that in the middle of one of those, what I call throat clenching panic attacks, Scott's been very open about his struggle with depression and anxiety. And that's been a part of our marriage since the day we got married. And one day when I was in the middle of one of those throat clenching panic attacks, I said to him, I am so sorry. And he's like, why are you sorry? I said, I just didn't understand. I said, I tried to understand. I really tried. But I just didn't understand. And he said this to me. He said, there are some things that you will never understand until you experience them. It seems so simple, but we've been married for 31 years. And I was just beginning to learn and identify and witness some of the pain that he'd experienced since the day we got married. And so it is hard work getting there, but accepting that there are things that you cannot understand until you experience them will cause you to have much less judgment for the people sitting around you. It will not be as big a deal when you disagree philosophically. It won't matter quite so much that one person has this value and another person has this value, because you realize at the end of the day, you're just holding each other's hands. You're holding each other's hearts. And we need to extend so much kindness and grace to one another so that we don't walk with a limp. I say that I'm looking forward to not walking with a limp, but I don't know that I really am, because I feel like that limp has led me to a deeper relationship, not just in my walk with Jesus, but it has allowed me to hold on to the things that really matter and let go of some things that are out here on the surface. And this is something I want you to realize, is that dealing with your pain isn't selfish. It is healing. And just understand that the pathway, I wanted to say that right there, is that dealing with your pain isn't selfish. Dealing with your pain is the pathway to healing. I didn't want to just kind of glaze over that, because I was really good at shelving all of that stuff. But when a shelf falls down on top of your head, that is not going to be a good look. It's going to be a really bad day. And one of the things I realized is I did not have the tools. I was not equipped with the tools to know what to deal or how to deal with all of that was happening. So therefore, that's why it turned into anxiety and panic attacks. When I started talking about my pain and I started dealing with it, each day I was able to have a little bit better tool in order to deal with it. And this is what I want to say before the band comes. They're going to sing a song that while they sing, I want you to realize and kind of focus on the fact that every single moment, even the hardest moments, everyone matters. You are not crazy. Every panic attack you've ever had stems from somewhere. Every moment of stressful anxiety that you cannot explain, it has a place that matters. You didn't just wake up one day and start experiencing it. It matters. But I promise you, it will lead you to the place that you need to be. Joseph experienced so much pain. He experienced so much disappointment. But at the end, he was esteemed as king. And when he had the power to throw his brothers in prison, he made a strategic choice to extend kindness to them. And let me tell you that that is where the real power is. When somebody deserves your anger, but you give them kindness, that is where the power is. So I want you to listen to this song and then I'll come back.
If you guys feel moved during this song, you guys can stand with me. You guys can sit. Whatever you guys need to do in this moment of worship. All the saints and angels, they bow before and all the elders cast their crowns before the Lamb of God and sing, you are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. Singing, sing all the saints and all the You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory.